In this video I have the remarkable story of a solicitor, Cahir O'Higgins, who was a leading criminal defence solicitor in Ireland for many years, 20 years. He had a massive practice, criminal defence practice, a lot of legal aid income, and probably reached 1 or 2 in terms of the amount of legal aid that was paid out by the state at various points in the last few years. But the remarkable story is that he's been convicted in the circuit court of theft, 1 count of theft of €400 from a client of his, a Spanish client with poor English, and he's been convicted in the circuit court of 4 counts of attempting to pervert the course of justice. The most remarkable thing, though, and I only discovered it yesterday, the most remarkable thing is that he's already in jail for 16 months stretch for assaulting a former employee of his, Stephen O'Mahony. He broke his nose, pushed him in the car park, broke his nose, and carried out a campaign of harassment for something like 16 months or something like that, 12 months or thereabouts, against O'Mahony, and indeed even rang O'Mahony's wife. A remarkable story. His parents both were TDs, college or private school, boarding school education, very bright academically, very successful, but he's in jail now and he's awaiting sentence. He's in jail now for the previous assault on the former employee, Stephen O'Mahony, who's also a solicitor, but he's also facing sentencing now for these 5 counts, criminal convictions. As I say, 1 theft, £400, and 4 of attempting to pervert the course of justice. It's a remarkable story. It's a sad story. It is what it is. Some of the details in the story, quite frankly, I only discovered them yesterday, and you couldn't make it up. The previous conviction and the fact that he was in jail was actually not disclosed to the public. It was withheld because there was obviously it would be prejudicial to his chances of getting a fair trial with the theft, the latest trial. So that wasn't withheld or wasn't disclosed. It was withheld from the public, and it was only disclosed yesterday. So that is the video I have for you today. Hope you like it.
One of the top criminal defence solicitors in the country, a man who had a massive practice there up to a few years ago, Cahir O'Higgins, has been convicted in the circuit court on 1 count of theft of €400 from a client, and on 4 counts of attempting to pervert the course of justice, by providing made-up notes to the Gardaí in the course of an investigation. He had pleaded not guilty to the theft, 1 count of theft of €400 in July 2016, and 4 attempts of attempting to pervert the course of justice. The jury, though, on Friday returned unanimous verdicts on all 5 counts, all criminal counts. The case now has been adjourned to November for sentencing. The background to the case, I've made a video about it already. It was to do with a Spanish national who was before the Dublin District Court, and he admitted to criminal damage in relation to starting a fire in a toilet cubicle in a nightclub or hotel in Dublin. The Judge John Coughlin, indicated that he'd pay, or he would strike out the charge if €200 was paid to the court poor box. So Mr. O'Higgins then stood in to represent the assigned solicitor. He was on legal aid, this gentleman, and was a solicitor already assigned to him under the legal aid scheme, but she wasn't in court, so arrangements were made for Cahir O'Higgins to stand in and represent him. The prosecuting Gardaí then obtained the Spanish man's bank card and PIN number and gave them to Cahir O'Higgins, who volunteered to go to the ATM. So Cahir O'Higgins went down to Londis and Parkgate Street, and CCTV showed him withdrawing the cash and then placed it in a piece of paper. O'Higgins made 2 further withdrawals and put these into his trousers pocket before making a further attempt to use the ATM. So evidence was heard that 3 cash withdrawals totaling €600 were made from the Spanish man's account. When Cahir O'Higgins returned to court, €200 was paid and the case was struck out. So the Spanish man was left with no conviction. But the Spanish man noted then, or noticed sometime afterwards, that he only consented to €200 being withdrawn from his ATM to pay the fine. So O'Higgins was invited to a voluntary interview about the theft allegation, and he arranged to meet the guards, and he emailed the Gardaí with handwritten notes. These notes outlined O'Higgins' apparent interactions with the Spanish man. He gave the originals to the Gardaí when he was interviewed. His argument, or his explanation, was that he was afraid that the judge may order compensation, and that Cahir O'Higgins, said that he got permission from the Spanish man to use or to get €600, not just the €200. And he said that he handed the €400 and the charge sheets to the Spanish man after the case was struck out. He said he finished up writing his notes that evening and later dropped copies into the office of the assigned solicitors. He later admitted in an interview that he became aware of a complaint by the Spanish embassy, and he said he wrote the notes around October 2016 in anticipation, he said, of shit hitting the fan with the Law Society. His main concern was that the Law Society would carry out an investigation, and he admitted to Gardaí that it was a serious error of judgment by him to provide them with bullshit notes, and this is what led to the charges of perverting the course of justice. He said he wouldn't risk his practice for €400 and he had 20 years of experience without any allegation of dishonesty. The prosecutor in the case said that Mr. Sanz Quilles, he's the Spanish man, that he was uniquely vulnerable to the theft because A, he was he was intoxicated, and B, he had poor English and there was an interpreter involved, but when Mr. O'Higgins met him, the interpreter wasn't around apparently. So the perverting the course of justice charges arose from Cahir O'Higgins' actions after he became aware of the theft allegation, and basically it was suggested that O'Higgins lied about these notes, which were intended as a defence against the theft allegation. His senior counsel said that it wasn't possible to be satisfied beyond doubt what happened here, and the correct verdict is not guilty. However, the jury did not agree with his senior counsel, and the jury have convicted him of the theft and 4 attempts of attempting to pervert the course of justice. I didn't realise it at the time, and I made a video last week, but Cahir O'Higgins was actually in prison last week and for this trial, but it wasn't disclosed until yesterday. He was actually in prison as a consequence of a dispute with a former employee of his, Stephen O'Mahony. The background to that case is that Stephen O'Mahony previously worked with Cahir O'Higgins in his practice, and Cahir O'Higgins was actually jailed for 16 months for breaking Stephen O'Mahony's nose in what was described by the judge as a thuggish attack. Reporting restrictions were placed at that time because the concern obviously was that the fact that he was in jail and already convicted of a criminal act would influence and prejudice this charge of theft. So reporting restrictions have now been lifted, and it's only now that we're learning about his incarceration, his imprisonment for the theft on O'Mahony. It was found that he engaged in a prolonged campaign of harassment against O'Mahony, who left his Cahir O'Higgins' firm to set up his own practice, and it culminated in O'Higgins breaking O'Mahony's nose. The sentencing judge in that case described O'Higgins' actions as thuggish, deranged, base and despicable. And earlier this year, O'Higgins pleaded guilty to 1 count of assault, causing Stephen O'Mahony harm, and to 1 count of harassing him over a period of between June 2020 and February 2021. 2 further accounts of simple assault were taken into consideration. O'Higgins had no previous convictions at the time, but has since gained a public order conviction in relation to a cycle rage incident involving 2 plainclothes Gardaí. He was sentenced to 16 months in jail by the judge on July 22nd this year for the harassment and assault charges. This sentence was deferred to the end of September to allow O'Higgins to settle his affairs and shut down his solicitor practice. It was referred to in court as previously the most successful criminal practice in the country. Reporting restrictions meant that that case could not be reported until after O'Higgins' theft and perverting the course of justice trial came to an end to avoid prejudicing the jury. He's been found guilty, as I say, of the 5 counts, 4 of perverting the course of justice and 1 of theft. On Friday, in July, apparently, there was extraordinary scenes after he was convicted in the court because he asked that he would be able to address the court and spoke from the dock for several minutes, partly to express his regret at offending, but also reiterate an application seeking permission to allow him to fly to Spain for a week at the end of July and also compete in the World Cycling Championships in Denmark in September before he went to prison. He said, "I think I owe the sport of cycling a proper goodbye. I should wear the Irish colours with pride." Now, this application was opposed by the senior counsel for the prosecution, but the leave to travel was actually granted by the judge. The decision, however, came in the wake of a scathing sentence delivered by the judge in which he described the various acts of O'Higgins' behaviour as deranged, thuggish, base and despicable. And he said that the harassment arose from an irrational obsession from the fact that the 2 parties, that is, Cahir O'Higgins and Stephen O'Mahony, were in competition for the same work, said the judge. He said it was a natural element of solicitor work that occurs every day of the week in this building, and he was referring to the CCJ. The judge said he chose to bully Mr. O'Mahony out of the space he was occupying on a professional basis. The judge said he believed Mr. O'Higgins believed that he was the law as opposed to being amenable to the law. And the judge says, "I can assure him he is amenable to the law." He actually handed down a 32-month sentence, but he suspended the final 16 months on several conditions, including that O'Higgins have no contact with O'Mahony or his wife and family. In September this year, O'Higgins announced on social media that he was closing his practice due to a variety of circumstances. He said he always intended to retire by the age of 50. He went into custody in September in advance of his October trial. At a sentence hearing into this matter in Dublin Circuit Criminal Court last June, the court heard O'Higgins repeatedly accuse Mr. O'Mahony of poaching his clients, sent him numerous threatening emails and texts, and was caught on video telling Stephen O'Mahony, "I will fucking get you." O'Higgins also engaged in intimidatory behaviour within the environments of the CCJ, stepping on Mr. O'Mahony's foot in court, elbowing him in the lobby and pushing him when they were both outside the building trying to engage with the same client, the court heard. That's incredible stuff. I mean, that is incredible stuff. We're talking about a professional solicitor, a professional, elbowing in the lobby, standing on his foot in court. Like, you couldn't make this stuff up. O'Higgins then, he texted Mr. O'Mahony's wife shortly after she'd given birth, telling her he would sue her husband until he owned their house, and he lied to Mr. O'Mahony, telling him he, Mr. O'Mahony, had been exposed to COVID and would have to isolate for 14 days, the court heard. The harassment culminated in an assault in February 2021, during which O'Higgins pushed Mr. O'Mahony against a parked car and punched him in the face a short time later, breaking his nose. Part of the incident was captured on CCTV footage, while Mr. O'Mahony also captured some incidents on his mobile phone. In a lengthy victim impact statement, Mr. O'Mahony outlined the effects of O'Higgins' offending had both on his personal life and on his professional one. During the sentence hearing, which took place last June, a detective Garda told senior counsel prosecuting that in April 2020, shortly after O'Higgins was charged with theft and perverting the course of justice offences, Mr. O'Mahony resigned from his position in Cahir O'Higgins Solicitors, where he'd worked for 11 years. So that appears to be the trigger for O'Mahony to resign. Relations then between the two men were initially amicable, but when O'Mahony started the process of setting up his own solicitor practice in June 2020, the relationship soured and O'Higgins started making repeated unwanted contact with O'Mahony, the court heard. Michael O'Higgins, senior counsel defending, said his client grew up in the 60s, the son of two TDs, which was quite an extraordinary event at the time. He attended boarding school and excelled academically. Why Michael O'Higgins, senior counsel, is telling the court that he's the son, Cahir O'Higgins is the son of two TDs, or what inference he's asking a court to draw from that, I'm not quite sure, quite frankly. I can't really see the relevance of it. He went on then, Cahir O'Higgins went on to set up one of the most successful criminal law firms in the country, but he suffered from acute depression, stress and burnout. That is the story of Cahir O'Higgins. It's a remarkable story. I mean, when I started off, and just as a bit of background, when I started off my practice in 2011, I spent a short period of time around the CCJ, the Courts of Criminal Justice in Dublin, to get a flavour for. I was actually shadowing another solicitor who kindly allowed me to shadow her for a period of weeks, I think it was, to allow me to get some exposure to criminal law and the CCJ, the district court, and that sort of work, because my own training solicitor, Cullen and Company in Inchicore, didn't actually do criminal law, and I wanted a bit of exposure to it just to see what it was like. And I was spending a lot of time in the CCJ and hanging around, but I do know that at the time there was serious competition between the firm that I was shadowing around versus Cahir O'Higgins in terms of competition for clients, and it was quite nasty, quite frankly, and there was complaints toing and froing, going in and out into the Law Society about unprofessional behaviour and soliciting and approaching each other's clients and so on and so forth. So the reference the judge made there to, ordinary competition and Mr. O'Higgins being, obsessed with getting clients and so on and so forth appears to be the case. Anyway, hope you liked the video. If you do, hit the thumbs up button down below, and if you want to subscribe to my YouTube channel, just hit the subscribe button. Thanks a lot.